Aloha kako. Welcome, everyone. So grateful that you are here. Welcome to our live audience, as well as those of you who are in the room who received the invitation today. Thank you for making the time, for showing up and participating. I am looking forward to this conversation. And in the next hour, feel free to add your questions. And we will ensure that we have time to, at the end, to get to those questions. Thank you. So, yes, the title of today's event is Finding Tranquility in the Midst of Tragedy. And the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, was obviously an immense and reverberating tragedy from which policy and cultural transformation must emerge. Healing will take time and must take place across multiple arenas using multifaceted approaches. Today, Ed Quevedo will help us to explore one facet and method of healing circles, and their use in the wake of the events in Uvalde on May 24th. So healing circles bring us out of the ordinary dimension into a safe and accepting environment where we can be open and vulnerable, but also empowered. And then with our minds more open, we can work together to discover the best ways to properly mourn, to honor, to remove barriers to personal peace. So we're hoping that you will participate today, and we'll explore the experience of convening a healing circle and explore possible spiritual and cultural leadership and facilitation around the therapies of discovery and healing and moving forward through trauma. So let me introduce our guide today. Ed Quevedo directs the Regenerative Design Program with the Foresight Lab, which is a collaborative advisory and creative agency composed of educators, policy innovators, international diplomats, social entrepreneurs, sustainability practitioners, and nonprofit leaders working together to build the new regenerative economy. He is a senior creative and trusted advisor who has worked internationally and domestically, guiding and advising some of the world's most respected companies, philanthropies, institutions of higher learning, and civil society organizations. These include Genentech Inc., BMW and Mercedes, Fetzer Vineyards, Rabobank, Royal Bank of Scotland, Barclays, University of California, South Carolina, Wisconsin, Tulane, the Omidyar Network, Open Societies Foundation, World Bank, United Nations Development Program, and so on. He is so generously donating his time to the Matsunaga Institute in a number of ways. And he is a practicing lawyer, as well as an advocate, and is a lifelong learner who continues to learn from the communities he serves, as well as his children. Aloha and welcome, Ed.
Thank you, aloha. It's good to be with you all, and thank you for joining and making the time. And as always, it's a privilege to be hosted by Matsunaga and your good selves, and it's nice to see you all this afternoon.
Fantastic. So can you begin by just telling us about Healing Circle? What is it? How do you set up or structure a Healing Circle process? What are some important things to consider, include, or avoid?
Sure. This work emerges, Maya, from our work on battlefields across Africa and Central America, brokering peace agreements. And I was determined to bring this work home, back to the US after 3 years working abroad. And we've been working in communities suffering trauma from a variety of events, mostly communities healing after predatory police killings. And we refined this craft in that domain. But in the case of Uvalde, it was the first time we were asked to come so freshly on the heels of such a unique kind of tragedy. The event happened on the 24th of May, it's a Tuesday. And I am at the time up in our bureau in San Antonio. And we had just spent the previous week, you may not recall, but the month before Uvalde, the Democratic Committee in Travis County in Austin was firebombed. I've been friends with the Democratic Committee chair in Travis for a long time. So I had gone down to San Antonio to our bureau there and had spent the better part of 4 days with her the week before, dealing with what was happening in the aftermath of this firebombing. When news reached us Tuesday afternoon, it wasn't the mayor, it was the Democratic member of Congress who asked us to come down. And I said, how shall we be presented? How can we come? And they said, we don't know, but we know we need some response. So here's what is important to think about. The concept of a healing circle is it's a trauma-informed intervention, but it's not a moment in time. It is designed to begin a process of reconciliation, emerging out of trauma, where a space is created first for anger to emerge. This is a community that at the time we were there on Wednesday afternoon, the 26th, the misinformation was just beginning to be propagated. We stayed there for a week through the period of time, and these conversations always have an arc to them. But we stayed there through the period of time that the truth of the event happened. So we really had to go through 2 cadences of trauma. But the most important to think about in terms of setting these up is to ask yourself, how do I want to be with these people? How do I want to be with these people? This is a question I always ask in our work, all of our bureau chiefs and agents. Practice this discipline of regenerative diplomacy. And how do I want to be present with these people is a question you always have to confront. Now, this can be done on a very small scale in a family setting. The key thing is to uncover common intent. And this is where a skill from the battlefield, peace negotiation, comes into the room, because the primary need is to create a space where people can recognize their common humanity and the experience that they're having. And inevitably, the first set of conversations are anger and outrage and a sense of being ill-used by the circumstances. And then we move quickly into blame. And our job as conveners of these conversations is to take that energy and to be present with it. And this is an emotional and how shall I say, a very intense experience, but it's one where you communicate so much non-verbally. So the loving pacific face of a convener who is in love with the humanity of everybody in the room has to straddle sharing their anger and outrage, which I do as someone who has dealt, as we all have, but on the front line with the results of gun violence for the better part of a decade, in having to do work that shouldn't have to be done, and set that aside and really just create this sense of tranquility and empathy, being present with the anger and the outrage and the fury, so that we can move from there into a place of tranquility and quiet. And you know when you're moving, when you're making that motion, when the room quiets. And sometimes you have to pause the conversation and let the words and emotions bounce off the walls. We were there in a conference room in the library. It accommodated over 100 people. You asked the question, who to invite, and we basically threw open the doors and said, please come and share your stories. Our goal is to achieve understanding. This is about meaning making. And the last thing I'll say, you asked in terms of, and I want to welcome everybody to ask questions and really feel like this is a roundtable conversation of brothers and sisters trying to discover, because after doing this work now for coming on 15 years, I'm just at the very beginning of it. And we only know a few principles, but it emerges differently each time. There's 2 things to avoid, and then I'll stop and let you ask other questions, and maybe the colleagues want to weigh in. The first thing to avoid is a sense of judgment. Everybody wanted to begin blame, and the blame voice has to be allowed to resonate, settle, and dissolve in the room, if that makes sense. In service of acceptance of the circumstances, and the kind of healing that only come from everybody holding each other. That's where you want to get. And that happens if you can avoid blame and let the blame conversations go by without responding. It's hard to do. It takes a lot of determination to not join in the blame or aim the blame. The second thing that it's important to avoid is cutting people off or allowing other people to cut others off. This is somewhat like being in a classroom of energetic students who all want to build on each other's points. We don't want to frame our responses while listening to the other. We want to make a conscious effort to fully take in and appreciate what's being said from whatever place the speaker is coming from. And I'll end with telling you a little vignette. There was a mother there who at the time was dealing with the loss of her daughter. And she said, I'm going to try to be as precise as I can here. My main anger comes from the fact that her potential was lost in an instant. The only thing to do with that kind of a profoundly gut-wrenching sharing is to hold it and repeat it back and let it sit with the group. And that process begins a process of getting to meaning making, if that makes sense. So those moments come when you have to just not speak and try to exert emotional energy that asks everybody else not to speak, so that we can hold the feeling and share in the feeling that's being experienced. And that's why it's a circle, because it takes everybody in the room. Very hard to do virtually. Anyway, I hope I answered your first three questions. And I'm not going to unpack everything at once. So there you go.
Thank you. All right, so I just want to, sort of, I'm hearing that you say that we have to lean into our discomfort, one, and that we have to think about the kind of energy that we're contributing, that we may have feelings, but as a convener, in order to help the circle hold space in a way that's productive, we have to be aware of what energy we are adding to the circle. And I also hear you say that there is fruitful work in the silence, and that there's recognition that can infuse the grief of such an event with an opening, a sense of possibility, a sense of recognition that can be helpful. You mentioned earlier the diplomat as a healer. I would like you to speak more about that image and metaphor and role. And does it mean that we are bridge builders across cultures, and can we all be bridge building healers regardless of our position?
Yes, that's another wonderfully stacked question. Yes, we can, and we should. And this is something that we are not taught well to do in the school system that we have here in the US. We are taught to take turns making our points, which is very contra the idea of being human, which is being present with each other's ideas, not making points. The reason that I revert to the idea of the diplomat, Maya, is because I think the notion of the diplomat as used in the West generally is very misunderstood. The picture of someone who creates compromise and who splits down the middle and comes up to a sort of some loss on both sides, some gain on both sides. I think that's a mischaracterization. In indigenous communities, when peace was convened, the uniquely consistent gesture is one of setting aside other, of being one. And it comes in my people, in the Yaqui of the American Southwest, from the image of the broken arrow. We will set down our arrows and fight no more forever. This idea has its roots, as I've studied it, in many indigenous cultures. And we all have a chance in every day to deal with this, whether it's a quotidian argument that you observe in a grocery store, or a deep family trauma, or holding space for one of these large-scale tragic events. The consistent theme is to find a way to allow people to make meaning together from their own perspective, because that's the only way you can get to the reconciliation, to the healing part. And here's the signal that the healing is beginning when people start to use the word understand. I understand we need to get to the bottom of this. I understand that I need to forgive. And there was a moment on the third day, towards the end of a very long and grinding day, we were working now. We started out with 120 people in a room, and then I went out into 10 separate meetings to hold space with a group of parents, with a group of teachers, with a group of police officers, etc. When I came back in at the end of the third day with all 120 or so participants, we had a live stream video to the community on their local community access channel. And I created this framework, this picture that showed how we move from sadness and loss through meaning to healing. You know that the healing is happening when people start using the word I understand. And there was this moment when a grandmother who didn't have family members directly involved, but she had been in the community forever. She was one of these wonderfully wise, unlike me, person of few words. And she simply said, I hope that we can find a way to forgive. And we spent a long time talking about forgiveness in that conversation. And people brought in their various theologies and biblical quotes. And fortunately, we had someone who was there who could bring in a quote from the Quran. And I spoke a little bit about indigenous ideas of forgiveness. And there's this arc of forgiveness that moves from acceptance to forgiveness to this sense of shared humanity. We have to live with this tragedy and always honor it, but try to find a way to take action. And that's the really difficult thing. People always want to go out and do things, whether it's protest or seek political solutions or work on policy. The most important actions we take are at the super local level. And you have to hold off that action until you really get a sense that everybody is in a place of understanding and shared meaning.
Thank you. So let's say understanding is achieved, and we therefore have genuinely embarked on the process of healing, and we make progress. What will that teach us then? You know, how is healing an evoker of truth? How does it lend itself to solutions and pathways forward? Why is it so important?
You know, that's a well-framed question, Maya. When I teach this to students in policy programs, what I try to get them to do is understanding the idea of co-presencing, making a reality of the moment. We are so focused on other timeframes that we have a hard time settling in the present moment. Any sense of resolution, any sense of response to be healing has to be very much of a present moment. We have to understand the present moment, the moment that we're in those rooms during those days in South Texas. The moment that we were in was a moment of shock and outrage and loss. It is essential to try to understand the idea of co-presencing, of making this reality together, so that the practitioner and those for whom space is being held can feel like they are in, I think the overused and mistaken term is a safe space. There's nothing safe about these rooms. Everything has been stripped away about safety. What you can create is a sense of peace. This is a place where you will be heard. The feeling you have, the diplomat creates mood above everything else. She creates a mood, and you have to work to think about what emotional mood you want to project. The mood that I was trying to project was this deep sense of appreciative forgiveness. And forgiveness is such an important and lost aspect of our everyday lives. Moving on from trauma, whether it's in the mental health context, whether it's in the physical trauma context, whether it's in the community context, has these dimensions. One critical element of which is a sense that we can do better together if we hold on to this moment of loss. I was just talking with my children about this phenomenon. On September 11th of 2001, I was doing work at Tulane University in New Orleans, and I was there for a week because the world shut down. But I talked to my children, who were much younger, obviously, at the time, and I said, let us, every time we hear a siren, think of those lost lives. And my oldest daughter was telling me that all these years later, she's in her early 40s now, she still thinks about that and holds on to that moment, and that it guides her in her life. And this experience of co-presencing creates a place where the lost ones can be honored. And that's what's most important to me. Because this tendency to move towards action often comes too quickly. And we have to really settle into this moment of forgiveness and healing for those who are lost, to be honored. And ultimately, and this sounds, I guess, perhaps a bit odd, ultimately, to reach a place of joyful reconciliation. We can do things together. I can live my life with that person's loss as a guide, as a true north. And when we're doing this kind of healing on a larger scale, in communities that are like Uvalde, traumatized as a group, our job is to continue to go there and listen to them tell their story, so that that story becomes part of the policy response. So that the uniqueness of the circumstances of that place, with 60% Mexican Americans and a police force and a government that didn't really understand them until we went through this process, can be forever changed in how they approach all the problems that they face. And that's why the work, I think, is so essential. It creates an opportunity for change in community, for shift in culture, and for coming into connection with, honestly, our more spiritual side, which is where forgiveness resides.
Yeah, you wash the eyes. And the forgiveness is, I think, something that has to be more than nominal. It has to be deep, not superficial. Something that can transform our spirit. You mentioned this notion that forgiveness in this instance, I think, has to be a spiritual undertaking. Let's talk a little bit more about spiritual therapy, specifically in connection to violent trauma such as Uvalde. And it seems that it is necessary to attend to spiritual matters, to the spirit. We can't intellectualize our way out of this, or at least intellectual solutions and policy solutions and problem solving, while necessary, is perhaps not enough to heal and to lead to long-term wellness in the beloved community. But spiritual work is necessary. So, how do we make room for political diversity and religious diversity and socioeconomic diversity as we do spiritual work together? You mentioned that someone else's sorrow can guide our actions forward. And is it necessary that someone is familiar to us, that we see those points of intersection if they are to be our guides? Can you talk about the messiness of diversity in spiritual therapy?
Mm-hmm. I'll try, but again, there's so much wisdom in the room. I want to invite again our participants, our co-celebrants, if you will, to join us here with their questions and thoughts, because there is no expertise in this domain. There is only inquiry and exertion of honest, steadfast, and true-hearted effort. I've learned so much from interfaith leaders in these settings. And the first time that I had to confront this, we convened a meeting in South Africa on behalf of one of our United Nations patrons there. And there was a Anglican Episcopal bishop who used these wonderful phrases, a series of phrases that crossed faiths. And she said a prayer, an invocation. Invocations are so important. I think we should start more of our daily meetings with invocations and invite prayer into the room. And the three things that I learned from her are, well, number one, to invoke the ancestors. There's a sacredness to those whose daily efforts made it possible for us to be here and be breathed in the spirit of life. And then there's the lives of those yet unborn who are depending on us to make good choices, to be good humans, to find good pathways, to counteract the dark side of the world. And she said, let us hold hands and bless and be grateful for the toils of those who came before us, that we may be here together and experience this moment, breathe this air, drink this water, share this communion of people. And let us take care and act every moment as though the children of our children's children are watching us and will hold us accountable for what we do here today. That is an expression that creates the salve or the ointment of spiritual healing that goes across boundaries and evokes a sense of the eternal in all of us, and it helps us to achieve transcendence. And when I teach diplomacy, I try to teach the idea of transcendence, this notion that whatever your faith, whatever your view, there are powers around us. The antithesis, the process of a bulb opening, of a flower opening, the experience of a sunshine or the wind on your face. There are these transcendent moments of joy around us that we can only experience in the quiet moments of our deepest humanity. And that's where we pursue and touch the sacred from whatever faith experience we come from. And that's also what gives us the strength to move through trauma and try to reach reconciliation, coming together, or atonement, at one-ment, coming back together. How does the diplomat know that her work is done? She knows because people who previously had the most vitriolic rage towards each other are sharing their common aspirations for the future. That's the goal. Getting there is a mighty enterprise and a long march. But before I left Uvalde the first time on the 7th day, I said, I'd like you to have a conversation. We had the mayor, we had an interfaith leader, and we had the head of the faculty group at the school in front of the room. And I said, I'd like you to have a conversation about how you're going to begin the school year next year. So I took them to the future. And the beautiful thing that emerged was a shared understanding that really education, the space that had been violated, can be a pure, joyful, clear space of understanding and appreciating our obligation to create a better future. And that influenced how I actually went down there on the first day of school this year. That influenced how they opened school at the new place where they're convening, because as you know, Rob is closed. And to me, that's the ultimate starting place. We can create a new reality by honoring this loss, and the joyful opportunity of the new day that comes after the trauma is where you're trying to navigate. And that helps, I think, give you patience.
I am struck by the fact that in order to move forward, then we have to move just from grief to mourning, and that has to be ritualized. And faith itself and spiritual work is the thing that gives us ritual very often, that is needed to mourn, not simply grieve, right? So I want to invite those who are on Facebook Live, as well as those who are in the room, to add questions and comments. And we will get to them very shortly. The next question, I guess, is, and you address this to some degree, but can you speak a little bit about, I guess, which cultures or communities you feel are most instructive in terms of finding deep and nourishing ways to heal trauma? I feel like we're missing a little bit of that sense of community healing in Western culture. And so as I would like to see the expansion of healing circles to incorporate into some of our national trauma and conflict in order to build peace in our culture. I'd like to ask, which cultures can we learn from as a nation in the United States to, to kind of relearn valuable community healing, that beloved community connection?
That's an interesting question. I mean, maybe it has more to do with how we look at culture and what we're looking for when we look to guidance from cultures. I will offer you one truth. I think it's a truth that comes from the Buddhist tradition that I use all the time. And I see this manifested in the writings and in the teachings of the curanderos, the healers of the Yaqui, the people that I come from. But I've also seen it in the way that everything from sport to art is manifested in various indigenous communities, from South Africa to the Kuskokwim, this wonderful indigenous community we work with on the Kuskokwim River in British Columbia. But let me start here. I hope most of the participants are familiar. I have a curriculum and a set of exercises built around Buddha's 3 gates. Buddha says, before you speak, ask yourself 3 questions. Take your words through 3 gates. Is what I'm about to say true? And reflect upon that, says Buddha. And then ask yourself, is what I'm about to say kind? And reflect upon that. And then ask if what I'm about to say is useful. True, useful, and kind. And if your words pass through these gates, speak your words into the world, says Buddha. That little guidepost has helped me avoid making many mistakes. And I did make mistakes in the early days of this work, primarily fired by my passion for justice. Those calm me. There's another, I think, truth that comes out of the Zuni tradition. We've been working for the last 2 years on governance processes with the Zuni Nation in the southwestern corner of New Mexico. And among that community, there is a spiritual practice called opening. And it's said among these wonderful people that before you come to a place of difficulty or argument or anger, let there be an opening within you that answers the question, what can I do to be good? What can I do here to be good? And good means so many different things, but I think what the fundamental message of this gesture is, how can I be my best self when things are hardest? It is no noteworthy thing to be at your best when everything is rosy and you're well fed and circumstances are stable and the sun is bright and the birds are singing. It is how we are when the chips are down, when the odds are long, and when the stakes are high. That's how we will be judged by our creator, however you see that entity. And so this ability to be good, how can I be good, I think crosses cultures and faiths and calls upon us to be a standard, to be a model, to be a venerated holder of the best of those who inspire all of us. And if we think about the people who've inspired us in our lives and moved us to do the work that we do in our lives, think about their better traits and try to emulate them. You know, there are these people we encounter that just exude a beautiful sense of goodness and humanity. And I'll end this really good question by saying that there's this picture on the cover of a book. I think I mentioned this to you before, Maya. It's called Why the Dalai Lama Matters. And it's one of the required texts that they now use at the Princeton School of International Diplomacy and Public Affairs after we redid their curriculum. It's amazing it wasn't on their curriculum before. But anyway, on this book, the Dalai Lama is passing a line of Chinese soldiers who are at attention with rifles. And he's got his hand on the barrel of a rifle and is looking to the face of an occupying soldier with this deep, eternal sense of love. And I practice trying to exude that in the rooms where I have to go and feel myself like crying and shouting and breaking windows and kicking holes in walls to achieve that sense of Pacific goodness. And I think those things are lessons. Any occupied nation has had to move through a sense of empathetic healing to be able to speak words of forgiveness to the occupier. So any occupied nation, I think, including, and I've studied this now for over 10 years, and I don't understand it fully, but I've studied greatly the experience of Indigenous Hawaiians and how the government, how the colonial government has been given respect. Those are the places I think we can go for learning and watching these moments when people should be filled with generational anger and outrage, but they can speak with respect and try to find common ground. That's where I look for inspiration, and that's where I think we can all find the grit and determination and open-heartedness to make healing in this way that I'm talking about.
Thank you. So I want to ask you two final questions, and we have a couple of questions from the audience. You're talking about making room, making space, making progress. I want to ask about the good that you've seen. Have you seen post-traumatic growth after Uvalde? And what is necessary to move from PTSD to post-traumatic growth? What has been the strength that has emerged from this terrible event?
Yeah, you know, we're 5 months into this experience in Uvalde, and I have a trip scheduled just after the election to do some listening sessions, and this is related to how they deal with school security in a way that doesn't involve responding to fear. So that's one of the primary tools of the regenerative diplomat, to give people a sense that they can leave their fear behind. Fear that it will happen again, fear that the wound will be reopened, fear that people will make mistakes, fear of others, fear of strangers. We have to move beyond this othering, and I have seen this in Uvalde in just the last 5 months. There is so much othering that happens in the moment of trauma, which is completely understandable. But we have to move from that to a sense of we and a sense of a shared future. And sometimes it takes a provocation, and sometimes it emerges naturally. But I will tell you that I was on a conference call with some of the teachers who were preparing for their first day of class. And I just convened the meeting and asked a series of questions. And one of the questions I asked is, how can you give me an example of every subject in your curriculum, how you're going to shift it so that we can become a better community and intolerant of this kind of hatred that gave rise to this young man doing this act. And it was a beautiful conversation. And I remember what the gym teacher said. The gym teacher said, I feel like we cannot teach any kind of contact sport. We need to teach, she wants to teach Aikido, which is the only martial art where you use the energy of the opponent to come into communion with the opponent. And I thought it was such a unique idea, that this sense of how can we make a better world through our everyday work from the place that I am, because we all do sacred work. Every single day, all of us do sacred work, from the grocery clerk to the regenerative diplomat, from the teacher to the gas station attendant. It is sacred work to look after each other. And this is what the work ultimately is about, looking after each other and recognizing our inextricable connection and that the goodness of our future depends on all of us putting this energy into place. So what I guess I'd say in final response to this question is, if we can find something sacredly transcendent to do to make a better experience for the least among us, every day, I think we have a chance at making this world non-divided, non-tribal, non-partisan, but post-partisan, and to recognize that we're all of one tribe. The work will continue, unfortunately. I think there'll always be need for this work. We need to train a whole new generation of diplomats to do this work better, more deeply, more authentically, and with more of a sense of calm and resolve. But each of us can do this work in our everyday experiences. And let me end by saying this to our colleagues who are with us, are sharing in this communion, not just questions, but you have insights from your own lives and wisdom that you've received. So feel free to share those stories as well as we move into that part of the conversation. And Maya, thank you for your exceptional thoughtfulness and these really good questions. I can tell they're good because I'm having to work to answer them.
Thank you, Ed, for your mental and emotional agility and your insights. We have here Kumu Kahu Ramsey Tom says, mahalo for acknowledging the trauma and spirit of the Native Hawaiian condition, which is rooted in the values of Pono Kuleana, Malama, and Aloha. Thank you for your mana'o, for your wisdom. We have a couple of questions here. Roger has a two-part. First of all, thank you for convening this, and thanks, Maya, for the question about spiritual healing. You're welcome. My question is, what are our methods of reconciliation, shared understanding with people who either refuse to engage in conversation or at least avoid it? Are there methods or lessons on how to create a bridge to such people, or is the work just internal at that point, a process of letting go? I ask this question in part because dialogue is so important to increasing understanding and building community, but people who ordinarily don't necessarily love being confronted with opinions they don't share seem trained to avoid intimate, possibly intense conversations. Yet without them, healings cannot happen. How do we handle people who are so sensitive at best or closed-minded at worst, and bring them to the table to break bread or at least share thoughts?
That's really profound, Roger, and I want to invite you to maybe share your own ideas about this. I'll give you a preliminary response. This work is very charismatic. It's very appealing. Those who are closed off and don't want to be a part of it only need to observe it. I will say that this wasn't in Uvalde, but there was a moment we were asked by the governor and the mayor to come to Minneapolis on the Tuesday after the murder of Mr. Floyd to do similar but also very, very different work. In the course of that work, there was a moment when we needed the police union to come to the table. We had reached a point where we wanted to do some policy innovation and fundamentally reform the curriculum at the police academy. We found in the curriculum of police academy the root cause of what was done that horrible afternoon. They wouldn't come to the room. So what I did, Roger, was I recorded a session that was already planned with two members of Mr. Floyd's family, a Baptist priest who came and offered her services so that she could be our sharer of prayers. She was the holder of our invocation work. And two school children who had done artwork to try to embody what they learned from this horrible event. And we shared this video with the police union, and just the energy of the conversation. And I sent it to the head of the police union with a covering message that said, please watch this. And if after you watch this, you're still unwilling to meet with us, I won't ask again. It was a 5-minute, 9-second video. What they experienced when they saw this, and to their credit, they did watch it, was a moment of innocent, non-judging forgiveness by the children. This one picture that this school child had drawn it was a picture of a garden. And in the middle of the garden was Mr. Floyd's face smiling. She said, that's how I want to remember him. Not in pain, she said. She said, not in pain, I want to remember him smiling. Because he was someone's son and he was someone's father. That moment of touched humanity, I think, moved them to not only come to the table, Roger, but to come to the table somewhat openly. And ultimately, we were able to fundamentally shift their curriculum. I don't claim to have all the answers, and there are some who will forever be closed. And I do think, unfortunately, that there is darkness in the world that can't be turned. But the moral arc of the truth of children, I have found time and again, moves the spirit of those who are hardened. Because the one thing that we share, as President Kennedy said 3 months before he was assassinated, the one thing he was talking about the Russians that we share is we want a life for our children that is good. So breaking bread is a great massage. There are 3 things that I learned early in this work in the lighthearted classroom where I was put in when I was working in Rios Partners, this international diplomacy agency. Food, music, and dance. People forget themselves when those 3 things are going on. Those are fundamentally shared elements of culture, and I bring them into the room as often as I can. Also, finally, Roger, the unexpected. The unexpected is such a great opener of closed minds and hearts. So if you can find a moment of the unexpected, I was in a meeting in Atlanta. Again, we're healing after a horrible police shooting. I was in a room composed only of police officers who had asked me to come and talk to them about how they can talk to people on the street in ways that make them forget that they're a citizen and police officer. I said, first thing, change your uniforms. There's so much truth in appearance. I want to tell you this because it's relevant to the closed mind. How you show up matters. Imagine the response, how people respond, and our hearts have to be with our cousins in Florida today, right? When you think of 2 kinds of first responders in a community of color, when a police officer shows up and a firefighter, 2 completely different emotional responses because of the way those people show up. But the closed mind and the closed heart, I think, can be moved by this powerful dimension of the voice of a child. And I also one of the things that I've learned that is so important is the importance of art, artistic expression, music, and the drawn handcraft of art and dance to get people to move through things. And for some people, this is an indigenous part of how we deal with the everyday cycle of life and the annual beautiful circle of the year. But these things are fundamentally human, and they can also open closed minds and hearts. And that was a very long-winded answer to a really super question. So anyway, if you want to offer any thoughts, please.
Well, first of all, I think that's beautiful and very well put, and I appreciate your emotion and your intentions. And I can see how meaningful this work is for you and for the people that you've helped. So I applaud you for that. I think, as for myself, I think that I'm a professional communicator, and I'm pretty good when there's an open window. When there isn't an open window, my own process has been that I really need to self-soothe to start with, because of this sense that I have there should be justice and that people should make a good faith effort to hear. When I have managed to succeed, it's largely been when I've done enough internal work that I have no agenda anymore. When the person who I'm reaching out to can really get a sense that my goal is to hear, not to talk. Because everybody wants to be understood and people want to hear, and very few people necessarily start off the way that you do and the way that Maya does and the way that people on this call do, where they start off wanting to listen. So I feel like sometimes when I've opened that avenue, how about I just listen to you? That's been helpful. But you know, I have to tamp down my own judgments and process them, because people can tell if they're being judged, and nobody wants to be judged. And certainly somebody who doesn't want to agree with you in the first place. So I guess that's the skeletal structure of my own process. But in some ways, I almost think that when there are tragedies, one of the benefit of a tragedy is that sometimes there's an opening that there wasn't previously. And I think that what you do and what people who work like you, what they have the opportunity to do is something really gorgeous, which is, yes, there's a fragile and there's been a fragmentation and there's been trauma, but people sometimes can be more open than they ever were.
Well said, Roger. Really well said.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
both.
you.
All right, I want to get to 2 more questions if we can. And thank you both for those excellent insights. This question comes from Kailani Jackson. With the collective trauma that the world has experienced over recent centuries, what can one person really do to make healing and restoration a reality for the earth and all mankind? In other words, how can individual action have universal reverberation and meaning?
Boy, I think that's a question for all of us. I mean, I feel like I should wait to hear the wisdom in the room on this one. Maya, you're a practitioner. I mean, why don't you take a swing at that? I mean, I have a response, but.
Yeah, I mean, what I tend to do as I work with exceptionally imaginative, eager, energetic, especially young people, but not necessarily young people, is I ask them to think about the dimensions of personal peace, interpersonal peace, and peace and service to their community, and then to take action in ways that are not overwhelming to them. We have to have our guiding star goal, but we can't take action if we feel that we can only do so when we know that there will be universal application and that mankind will be healed. We can only really take action if we feel, believe, and have that sort of strength-based approach, in our capacity to heal the person next to us, to heal the land around us, to impact the community, to make something beautiful, to build a bridge where none was before, to find a way to impact policy at the local as well as national level. And so my feeling is that we are all solutionaries, but what you and Roger and others have said, this idea of like coming to a place of personal peace first, but also thinking about our relational capacity next, to impact those around us most as fully as we can. But I think that what happens is if we get too overwhelmed, that we become stuck and immobilized and we feel impotent, right? So I think that's a danger. I think knowing that we have helped our neighbor or community members and trying that out and practicing again and again gives us the strength and the confidence to keep doing more of that work. And, and then we begin to widen the ripples of water. And if we all do that, of course, we can have an immense impact.
Yeah, and I would say, Kailani, think about the power of the few who do evil, who do ill. How powerful that is. It only takes a few placed in the wrong place or at too high a position to do a lot of evil that we have to spend years getting past. Certainly the power of doing good, the simple truth of being human to each other is of equal force. And there's a wonderful exercise that I do with young diplomats It's something I can only teach when someone has had a failure, and you fail more often in diplomacy, especially regenerative diplomacy, than you succeed. But there's this exercise that we built around this wonderful quote from Maya Angelou. whose work I think is too often overlooked. She said, if I remember correctly, seek patience and passion in equal amounts. Patience alone will not build the temple. Passion alone will destroy its walls. It isn't hatred that we have to overcome. It's power. It's authority structures. Our fundamental work, and I'll just land on America today, and in my work with nonprofits in Hawaii, I have seen our fundamental work is to shift power structures. You shift power structures not with policy, but with outreach, with community building, with trauma-informed community building. Maya and I are on the cusp of an initiative that I would like to bring to Hawaii, building on the work of community redevelopment, community revitalization and reawakening through regenerative agriculture that we did in New Mexico, that I would love to bring to Hawaii in the context that one of the tools is this healing circle model. And the point is, Kailani, and I want to invite you in, and also I'd love it, Ramsey, you're a practitioner too. I learned so much from you in the session that we had with Maya last month. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'm sure everyone would benefit from your wisdom. But I would say only this, Kailani, that quote, passion and patience, sometimes it takes both in equal amounts, and to express passion patiently and to express patience passionately is a practiced skill. It's like learning a dance or a sport or a language. Practice those things and go into the world and give people your lovely smile, and you will do good in immeasurable volumes.
Thank you, Ed. Okay, so our final question here comes from Kat Brady, who does a lot of work in advocacy and around decarceration and reformation of the carceral system. But the power of healing circles rests in pilina, connection we have with each other. This process can work in so many ways. We do circles in prison to address the trauma and promote connection with the world outside of human cages. This is a process the world needs now. Mahalo nui, Dr. Q. How can we convince governments that this process is more effective than punitive measures? And it says the healing, second part is the healing circles I'm aware of are with justice involved youth and adults. We need more circles on all islands and also to help people navigate all sorts of trauma. Okay. Would you be able to address that?
I'd love to, but again, I feel like we need to tap into Ramsey's wisdom. If it's okay, Ramsey, I'd love to hear your reflections on anything that I've said or this question before I go on, because you have so much to offer your good self.
I appreciate that. Thank you for your manao and Ike and Maya for this space. And to my friend Kat, thank you for that question. I was thinking along the same lines. In large part, I think, Ed, that you've addressed it. I think it's in our worldviews and how we define and what our expectations are at the end of a process. If we're starting out with a question of what's justice, and thinking about Kat and the work we do, if justice looks like punishment, then the process that we take is going to be rooted in that, right? And so when we look at a worldview of the Hawaiian process of Ho'oponopono, or making right, which is a healing-based, we can go back to our Pu'uhonua principles, which is really a healing center. But the Western worldview of Pu'uhonua expressed it as a place you went to avoid punishment. And so the last thing you hear in that statement is punishment. So consequently, people think of Pu'uhonua as a prison where punitive practices are exercised rather than healing ones. Where the Pu'uhonua is really a healing place where it acknowledged that the disciplinarian, whether it was agriculture, fishing, what have you, acknowledged within an individual that their anno, their seed, their identity, rather than building a house, they tore the house down. Or rather than fixing a car, they stole the car. So what they would do, they would huli that. They would say, you're obviously showing a penchant for working on cars. So let's go, you go live with Uncle John and you go learn to fix cars now. If you used your hands to hurt someone, now you go study with Auntie Leah and you become a Lomi practitioner. So that practice was about bringing back balance. It wasn't about fixing the problem, but about creating the new condition, right?
Yeah.
And so how we define the outcome and what our expectations are. So if I come from a worldview where the only way that I'm going to find peace is if somebody else is, punished, then clearly we're going to have some challenges. And which is why we spoke to the idea of aloha being a higher order of giving and receiving, which includes this notion of how do I bring balance, and not balance from an equal standpoint, which is again a continental worldview, right? But of equity, which is more equilibrium than it is balance. Some days you have more, some days you have less. And it is in that cultural worldview that I think we can have this conversation about healing and justice. But if it's in the other worldview, then I think we're going to get more of the same, So I think you articulated very well earlier, is that depending on the cultural framework, these practices that we bring in need to be relevant to the way that community relates to one another and to their places. So I'm sorry if that's too out there in terms of a lofty approach, but I think that raises the ceiling a little bit, so that we're not looking at a process specific from a process standpoint, but from a relational perspective. Yeah, I hope that makes sense, Ed. But thank you for asking.
Well, and that speaks to we're not just looking at process, but a relational capacity, but also, that allows the spiritual and artistic and other dimensions also to come into play. And I think you're absolutely right, to sort of maximize relevance, which doesn't mean we don't learn from each other. It means that, we ground ourselves in our relational understanding and kuleana sense of responsibility, to honor the knowledge that is present in any community and culture. Thank you so much for being a practitioner and a healer in our community. I want to
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to see if Ed has anything to respond to that, to what Ramsey just said, but I also, I know that Ed wanted to kind of walk us through a little bit of the sort of imagining how we could convene a healing circle. There has been some, so we have 25 minutes left. There has been some comment here in the chat that suggests, by the way, that people are eager to participate in the regenerative ag and economies efforts, Ed. So perhaps if Jose, you could share or I'll just share my email here with all who wish. You can let me know, and we will reach out to you to involve you and bring you into some of these efforts. But I also wanted to ask you, Ed, one question, which is that what do you hope each participant who is here today listening on live or listening to this recording afterwards, which is how most of the people will experience it, what do you want them to take away? What do you want them to learn and to activate in themselves?
I guess I would ask everyone to give themselves a moment of reflection. We're given time in this life, in this envelope of earth, with all of its beauty and wonder and its sadness and tragedy. And one of the gifts is that we get the chance to reflect. And if each of us can reflect in moments of repose about how we could have done better when confronted with trauma. I do this exercise regularly. I'm confronted with micro traumas and macro traumas, and I can always do better. If we can reflect how we can do better, and then after we have had that reflection, if we can reflect on the difference between three kinds of experiences. And again, this is something I never will stop doing. I hope if I ever find myself not doing this, I'll leave this work. There's the physical aspect of being human and the socio-emotional aspect of being human that is deep in our culture. Reflect upon these three differences, the difference between speaking and talking. Speaking is a thoughtful, reflective, holistic response to the full humanity of the other. But you can't speak or talk until you've seen, not looked. Looking is a physical act. Seeing is a socio-emotional, cultural act. See the other person for what she is, for all that she has experienced, good and bad. And whether you're talking to someone who's incarcerated or a child or a troubled teen or a life mate. But first, as you said, Ramsey, don't hear, but listen to all the things that aren't being said, to the emotion in the room. If you listen and let your listening inform your seeing, and let your words be informed by those two, and you reflect on and practice that, it is a practiced craft, you will find yourself much more powerful in your own ability to move in the world in a peaceful way, in a healing way. And I want to honor the core of your question, which is about policymakers and government. Policy and government are dumb. They are reactive. What Indigenous people knew about governance was it comes from our connection to earth, place, and time. What wants to grow here is the fundamental question of Indigenous cultures and regenerative agriculture and a healing circle. What kind of healing wants to grow here? Must emerge from this land that has been soiled with the blood of our children. That is a horrible moment, but it's also a beautiful moment to begin regeneration. It has always been the job of those who really govern the people to inform policymakers and government, to insist on transformation, not change, on revolution, not reform. And if we ever lose the spirit of revolution, of standing up for our colonial experiences and being able to express our indigeneity in a way that is true, honest, healing, and fair, if we ever give up on that, we will lose what Ramsey said. I want to come back to this and maybe close with this, our sense of balance. Really, when someone does wrong in a community, they are out of balance and it's the community's failing. And our barbaric Western way of dealing with incarceration is one of our most fundamental failures. So my theory is, instead of spending all this money and time at the end of the pipe, if we fundamentally change the way we educate, we offer life and growth and humanity to our children, we will deal with this at the front end instead of having to deal with it at the back end and seek balance. So anyway, that's my thought about this. And I'm sorry, I want to also offer one more reflection. It goes back to your first question. Each day we're confronted with the opportunity to make a difference. We live in a world, we move in a world, and if we're awake and aware, we can make a bigger difference than we know. And this goes back to Kailani's question too. Our every moment is a chance to do this, even if it's just with ourselves. So take care of yourselves, give all of yourselves the love that you give to the world so that you can be stronger and better for the fight, because it is a fight. And there are those who don't want us to win. But the power of a lifelong commitment to bringing justice and goodness into the world is overwhelming to those who would have less.
Thank you, Ed. Can I add to what you were just mentioning?
Please do.
You know, I think a big part is that many of us speak and or talk, but say nothing. And so I think the core is understanding that those two mechanisms of speaking, talking, and listening is really about communicating, right? And in the foundation for the word communicating is communing. So the reason for speaking, talking, or listening is to commune, to come together. And when there is a separation or a disconnect, then the aspiration is to reconnect, to repair. But when reparations is driven by legal constructs of government, who is driven by people who themselves operate in fear of doing their job properly rather than doing the proper thing, it appears we have conflicts in values, but really we have conflicts in priorities, right? So as we speak and talk, what's the priority in my speaking, talking, and listening, which ultimately should be communing? And in a community that is fractured because of practices put into place that are built upon fear, then one of the answers to that is, of course, faith, not from a faith-based standpoint, from a religious standpoint, but the acknowledgement that what I believe in is true, is consistent, that I can trust it. And trust has a lot to do with that. So I mean, there's so many things here. But in the absence of trust, we fall into the practices of fear, which then lead to the kinds of punishment systems we have because we're afraid we're going to let them in, all those kinds of things. And so to a certain degree, there is a lot to say about faith. Faith in what? Right? Faith in that positive thing rather than faith in the negative thing, which basically leads to fear. And in the absence of a desire to commune, we talk a lot. So I'll stop talking. But that would be my observation. It's not so much that we speak, talk, or listen, but what's the intention behind that? And if we have really no intention of communing, but just telling people what to do, to tell rather than to show, I think we get more of the same. Yeah, but thank you again for the opportunity.
Yeah, wonderful. Well said. Well said. I want to commend a notion to the group to think about. These oppositional forces in the world that we wrestle with should be acknowledged. And I think it is not fear, but power against which we must work. And there's a book by one of my teachers, Adam Kahane, called Power and Love. Power and Love. And it's a beautiful work of sort of transcendent diplomacy. And it tells the story of peacemaking from his work in Rios Partners, which is where I learned this craft. And in the book, Power and Love, he says that power, when exercised without love, is always destructive. Love, without a sense of a powerful willing to fulfill the other, will always be destructive. If we think of love, it's the fundamental gesture of a teacher. Love in this expression is the passionate impulse to see the other fully realized. That's the fundamental gesture of a teacher or a parent or an elder. And whether it's a quiet, peaceful auntie or a tirating, furious auntie, we've all experienced these powerful people in our lives. And the lesson there is to balance power and love and to always be in love and always be in power, but in balance. If we do this, we have a chance to break through dominant models of hierarchy and patriarchy and colonialism and top-down politics, and to have the emergent wisdom and the authentic blessing of the governed be our watchword for how we make policy, and not the experimental power of those who, as you say, Ramsey, are afraid of getting it wrong. When you are in fear, you cannot be human, you cannot be creative, and you cannot do good. So surrender fear and embrace a sense of justice and the eternal wisdom of those who inspire you. Set aside your fear and go bravely into this work every day. Maya, you're muted. We want to hear every lovely word.
Thank you all for your exceedingly articulate and meaningful words, uplifting love, and acknowledging that, those who have suffered and struggled and who are bravely moving forward to claim love and to have that strength-based approach, infusing all with the light of love, that they are the ones who we need to hear and feel. And you are exceptional practitioners and growers of love. So I'm tremendously grateful. We have 13 minutes. I do recommend that everyone read Adam Kahane's, Power and Love, and consider the applications in your own life, and to recognize that love is not a soft and mushy thing, but a truly powerful and intense, strong force that can transform anything. And I'd like now to, in the time that remains, I'd love to have you share with us a little more about, sort of, kind of the pragmatic, step by step, or guide us through so that we feel a little bit confident at the end of this in creating healing circles in our own lives. Are you able to do that in the little time that remains?
I can, but while I do it, I'd like to invite everybody to go through a bit of a thought exercise.
Yes.
It was what I was going to do if we had, when you show up to these things, you have to go with the energy of the day, and the energy of the day was this wonderful dialogue. But I think we can practice what I'm about to say. If you think while I'm talking, and maybe write down 5 or 6 words that you would say to a parent in Uvalde. What would you say that would satisfy Buddha's 3 dimensions of something that is true, something that is kind, and something that is helpful? That kind of practice, this is a practiced craft. It takes every day waking up and practicing it. Here's 5 steps that I think about when I'm trying to frame one of these interventions, whether it's small or large, and they're always very challenging. It goes back to something that Ramsey said: intent, uncovering common intent. Why are we here? We too often make the mistake of asking, what are we going to do today? Instead of how are we going to be together today? Uncover common intent, step 1. Step 2, co-sense what is needed. I say to people in the room, quiet yourselves for a moment and ask what is needed from me today, here, to feel, to say, or to do. What is needed from me? Observe, connect with people and place. The 3rd step is to presence. There's this source of inspiration that swirls when more than one human is together. And we are creating, as Ramsey said, again, this sense of communion. Come into that and be quiet for a moment after the energy of voice and sadness and trauma and whatever else has entered the room. Come to the quiet place and allow inner knowing to emerge and the shared wisdom of the tribe to emerge, to then, number 4, co-create. How can we carry this dialogue forward so that we can co-create the future from this? And then finally, the action step, the co-evolving. What are we going to do differently in this community to both honor and protect those things that we hold most sacred? So those 5 steps are guideposts, and they're not perfect. And we, at the lab, we reserve the right to change them, and I'll teach this differently the next time I teach it. But I think those things are helpful and hopefully useful to you all. Can
you say the 5 one more time? I was starting to write them in chat, but I didn't go fast enough.
Yeah.
So
what I'll do is I'll write this up for you and I'll send it. Then you can share it with the group, because it doesn't really translate into chat so well. And I don't want. I would rather not put you to that task. You have a much higher calling than recording my little words. Discover common intent. How are we going to be together today? What is needed from me today? How do I need to be with these people today? Number 1. Number 2, co-sense. Connect with people and observe how they are. Be present to the moment. Step 3, look for the quiet inspiration after the words and all the energy and all the expressions of emotion have come, what is there? What is emerging out of the center? What wants to grow there? And then 4, co-create. What can we do to step forward from here to create a loving reality, a healing reality, a permanently transformed reality, and then co-evolve into action? What are we going to do to exemplify and embody what was done here today? Because our future generations will judge us by whether we get this right. Okay, so there you go, and hopefully that helps.
All excellent things, and I'm grateful for them, and I think that that exercise, it's hard. Just the very beginning question, this notion of what we would say to the people of Uvalde, that's a really important one that I would like everyone to actually contribute to in the chat, if you wouldn't mind. Just now, you don't have to, obviously it is such a difficult thing to know precisely what to say. So relieve yourself of the burden of having to be perfect in this moment and to say the perfect thing. And instead, so as not to overwhelm, just say one thing that fits the standard of being truthful, kind, and useful, perhaps. But just one thing that you would say, and put it in chat, and let's get some of that collective wisdom. So I'm going to ask you to take just a moment and just to do that for now, and then I'll read out some of your answers. Okay, just one more minute. Okay. So let's see. How can we help you to trust again? Great that you have a question gate, did a direct message there. Finding peace gets easier when we acknowledge that peace is an inside job. Kailani has shared both gratitude and for the wisdom shared here, and a resource, the Global Collective Healing Trauma Summit that began today. There are a multitude of modalities and connective shared experience. Ed Young says, the healer is one who sees the person in front of them as whole and not broken. I have said, remember your water, wind, fire, and earth as you build your power at the center of the storm. You must be tired. We hold you. Thank you for sharing lessons on how to remain standing and resilient. Thank you for helping us to get in touch with the pain of others and find our way out of rage and grief to resilience and courage. I'm so sorry for your pain, Kat says. I send you love every day to help you through your grief. And New Wave 808 says, sometimes understanding how to be patient with others starts by being patient with ourselves. At any rate, thank you. Thank you all so much for this time. As we come to a close, I hope that you feel both moved to do healing work, which is spiritual work, in your own spaces and communities, that you can focus not simply on what we have lost as individuals, as a community, as nation, as world, but have that strength-based approach as we care for others and learn to be upstanders and find courage and determination to see what's possible in terms of freedom and connection and the light after trauma. So thank you for being part of our community, and we look forward to doing more with you. Ed, any closing words? Thank you.
I will share one thought, one word that centers me when I've lost the plot and I don't know what to do. And it's a word born of pure love, and it doesn't really have an English cognate, but it comes from the Bantu language of South Africa. It is Ubuntu, U-B-U-N-T-U, and it literally means I am because you are. And again, borrowing from Ramsey, I'm going to have to start paying you, Ramsey. It is a deep sense of communion. When I'm in these moments and I'm confronted with someone whose pain is so palpable and I need to find the right words, I think of and try to project the spirit of Ubuntu. And for all of you today, I am because you are there in this beautiful place, wonderful, timeless land of truth and beauty and wisdom and trade winds and a spirit of unquenchable kindness is what I find whenever I'm in Hawaii. And, the Lama, I can feel from here. So thank you all for your wisdom, for sharing the time, for listening with patience and kindness. And please forgive my mistakes. And if I've said anything useful, that's great. But blessings to you all.
Thank you. Blessings to you all. And look forward to seeing you around another corner. Aloha.